Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, December 12th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our headline today, Senate deadlocks on health care, leaving subsidies to expire. Republicans blocked Democrats' effort to extend the expiring subsidies, while Democrats thwarted a GOP proposal to replace them with direct payments for basic health coverage. By Carl Hulse. The Senate on Thursday deadlocked on competing proposals to avert rising health care premiums, blocking Democratic and Republican alternatives in an outcome that made it all but certain that expanded tax subsidies for health coverage under the Affordable Care Act will expire at the end of the month. Republicans squelched a bid by Democrats who had demanded action on the issue during the 43-day government shutdown to extend the insurance subsidies for 3 years. Democrats turned back a Republican alternative that would replace the subsidies with an expansion of tax-advantaged health savings accounts and direct payments of up to $1,500 to people who buy the most basic health insurance plans. Neither proposal could muster the 60 votes necessary to overcome a filibuster and move ahead, a long-expected result that teed up a brutal battle over health care that is likely to shape the fight for control of Congress next year. Both plans were thwarted on separate votes of 51 to 48. 4 Republicans, Senators Josh Hawley of Missouri, Susan Collins of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, both of Alaska, joined Democrats in support of taking up the extension, while all Democrats and a single Republican, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, opposed the GOP alternative. With Congress set to leave for the holidays after next week, and the two sides still far apart on their approach to rising health insurance costs, time was nearly out to renew the premium subsidies that millions of Americans depend on to afford coverage on the federal health care exchange. Democrats have promised to spotlight the issue in midterm election campaigns, seeing an opening to pound Republicans for failing to head off sharp premium increases and threatening health care access at a time when many Americans are toiling to afford basic necessities. Now the next chapter begins, Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York and the minority leader, said after the vote. Republicans will have to answer to the American people. Republicans said Democrats' bid to preserve the subsidies would simply maintain a bloated federal program that was meant to be temporary and is experiencing unsustainable costs. They said a new Government Accountability Office investigation also found that the program is susceptible to fraud that has contributed to insurance company profits. The Democrat proposal, which is a 3-year extension of the status quo, is an attempt to disguise the real impact of Obamacare's spiraling health care costs, said Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota and the majority leader. If we extend this 3 years at a cost of $83 billion to the taxpayers, what happens after 3 years? Democrats said that the Republican proposal amounted to an inadequate coupon for health care, noting that it would go only to those who purchased high-deductible insurance plans that require people to pay thousands of dollars for medical care before receiving coverage. They argued it would do nothing to head off the immediate threat of rising premiums, harming Americans who could lose coverage and be unable to afford needed care. The whole conversation about these Affordable Care Act tax credits in this town, in this building, has been focused on the politics of this issue, said Senator Jon Ossoff, Democrat of Georgia. This is life or death. People will die. Republicans said the root cause of the escalation in health insurance premiums was the Affordable Care Act, the health insurance program established by Democrats during the Obama administration. Democrats know that Obamacare has failed, said Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, and one of the authors of the Republican plan. Their only offer is more spending. Republicans had committed to allowing Democrats a vote on their proposal to extend the health care subsidies as a condition of a deal to end the government shutdown. The GOP, which has struggled for years to coalesce around a health care plan, had considered not offering an alternative to the Democratic proposal. But party leaders faced pressure to put a plan forward so Republicans could say they had tried something to address the expiring tax subsidies. House Republicans have said they will next week begin considering some piecemeal measures that represent their approach to addressing rising healthcare costs, but an extension of the subsidies is so far not part of the mix. As a result, a group of House Republicans worried about the political backlash from allowing the breaks to expire started a petition on Wednesday to try to force a floor vote on a plan to extend the subsidies on a narrowed basis for 2 years. A second bipartisan petition would force action on a bill to renew a scaled-back set of subsidies for 1 year. If Democrats were to unite behind either petition, it could clear the threshold necessary to require a vote on the House floor. But most Democrats have so far refrained from signing either as they continue to hold out for their preferred 3-year extension. The White House has taken a largely hands-off approach to the congressional health care fight after President Trump initially suggested he would back a limited extension of the subsidies, but was quickly urged by Republicans on Capitol Hill to drop that push. The president is prepared to take action on health care, and he wants Republicans on the Hill to do the same. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, said on Thursday when asked what Mr. Trump would do to address soaring costs now that the subsidies are on track to expire. She added that people would hear more about his plan to do so very soon. Members of both parties said they still wanted to try to reach some solution, even though bipartisan negotiations have come up empty so far. "I'm ready to come to the table," said Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire. "I think we would be better served if, after we get through these votes, we sit down and come to a compromise to address the real costs that people are facing in terms of health care." Mr. Hawley, one of the Republicans who crossed over, said he believed it was time to start debate on a solution. "Right now, people at home are saying we need our health care prices to be lower," Mr. Hawley said. "They need help on everything. So I'm doing everything that will help lower the cost." Indiana lawmakers reject Trump's new political map. Republicans hold an overwhelming majority in the Indiana Senate, but more than a dozen of them defy the president's wishes, voting against a map aimed at adding Republicans in Congress. By Mitch Smith. Republican members of the Indiana Senate bucked President Trump on Thursday and joined Democrats in voting down a new congressional map that would have positioned Republicans to sweep the state's U.S. House seats. The 19-31 vote was a highly public defeat for Mr. Trump, who has spent significant political capital pushing for redrawn maps in Republican-led states and who repeatedly threatened political consequences for Indiana Republicans who did not fall in line. The defiance of Mr. Trump comes as he faces other signs of rifts within his own party. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office after the vote, Mr. Trump downplayed the result in Indiana, saying that we won every other state. He also said that he hoped the president pro tem of the Indiana Senate, who voted against the map, loses his next primary. The rejection of the map in the state Senate, where Republicans hold 40 of the 50 seats, followed months of presidential lobbying that turned increasingly pointed in recent weeks as it became clear that some holdouts were not budging. Mr. Trump had called some of them out by name on social media, openly questioning their loyalty to the party and pledging to back primary challengers against them. As the debate turned more tense, several Republicans, both for and against the new map, reported threats or swatting. Long-simmering ideological and stylistic divides among Republicans in Indiana spilled into the open, with many long-serving or institutionalist figures who opposed the map clashing with Trump-aligned conservatives who favored the plan. Republicans would have been expected to flip the only 2 Democratic-held congressional seats among the state's 9 districts if the new map had passed. In the end, a slim majority of the Senate's Republican caucus voted against the map. That Indiana lawmakers voted at all showed the enduring power that Mr. Trump holds over his party. Many in the state Senate did not want to debate the map, which was proposed outside the usual once-a-decade redistricting cycle, and the chamber's leadership relented and brought the bill to the floor only after the president and his allies stepped up their pressure campaign. The map's defeat, though, showed the limits of Mr. Trump's power to bend Republican officials to his will. "I believe the bill on its face is unconstitutional," said State Senator Greg Walker, a Republican who opposes redistricting, and who recently reported a swatting incident at his home, a form of harassment in which law enforcement was called to respond to a non-existent emergency. Another Republican opposed to the new map, State Senator Spencer Deery, said that "I see no justification that outweighs the harms it would inflict upon the people's faith in the integrity of our elections and our system of government." He added that it's time to say no to pressure from Washington, D.C., and that it's time to say no to outsiders who are trying to run our state. Republican supporters of the plan framed the new map as a way to offset gerrymandering by Democrats in other states and boost the odds of a Republican majority in Congress. Some of them spoke in dire terms about what it might mean for the country if Democrats take control of the U.S. House. "I don't want to wake up the morning after the election in November to find out we lost the House of Representatives by one vote," said State Senator R. Michael Young, a Republican who supports redistricting. State Senator Mike Gaskill, another Republican redistricting supporter, said President Trump is not forcing this on us, he's encouraging us to do the right thing, to stand up and fight. The redistricting arms race that started this summer with Texas Republicans and that quickly spilled across state and party lines has shown signs of cooling in recent weeks. Kansas Republicans rejected a Trump-backed plan to consider a new map in a special session, and Maryland Democrats have been publicly divided over remapping. The Democratic governor of Illinois did not immediately pursue a new map, but told local reporters that his state might redraw its map if Indiana went ahead with redistricting. Indiana senators debated the map on Thursday as anti-redistricting protesters gathered outside the chamber, chanting phrases like "Fair maps now." Democrats blasted the proposed map as cynical and unfair, arguing that it sliced like-minded areas apart in order to maximize Republican political influence. Indianapolis, the state's Democratic stronghold, would have been carved into 4 districts under the proposed map. Those districts would have matched urban neighborhoods with conservative rural counties. Some Democrats questioned whether splitting up the city, which has significant Black and Hispanic populations, would have amounted to an illegal racial gerrymander. By any standard of good governance, this is an unprecedented and profoundly cynical exercise of political power. State Senator J.D. Ford, a Democrat who opposes redistricting, said during a committee hearing earlier in the week. And it's the old phrase, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. After the vote, some Republicans called for moving on and focusing on other issues, while others pointed to fallout from the remapping debate that was still to come. Governor Mike Braun, a Republican redistricting supporter, said in a statement that he was very disappointed that a small group of misguided state senators have partnered with Democrats to reject this opportunity to protect Hoosiers with fair maps and to reject the leadership of President Trump. Ultimately, decisions like this carry political consequences, Mr. Braun added. I will be working with the president to challenge these people who do not represent the best interests of Hoosiers. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Abrego Garcia is released from ICE detention after judge's order. The judge said it was troubling that the Trump administration had kept Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia in custody for nearly 4 months without following through on its pledge to re-expel him. By Alan Foyer. A federal judge on Thursday released Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia from immigration custody, saying that the Trump administration had detained him for nearly 4 months without lawful authority, despite repeated vows to re-expel him from the country. The ruling by the judge, Paula Zinnes, was a stinging defeat for the administration, which had often promised that Mr. Abrego Garcia would never walk free on U.S. soil. It was also the latest twist in a long and Byzantine saga that over the past year transformed him from an unknown migrant living in Maryland who was wrongly deported to El Salvador in March into one of the best-known symbols of President Trump's aggressive deportation agenda. Judge Zinnes' ruling, issued in federal district court in Maryland, meant that Mr. Abrego Garcia would be both free from custody and, at least for now, out from under the immediate shadow of being deported from the country yet again. But while the ruling was a stern rebuke of how Trump officials have handled his multiple intersecting cases, it is unlikely to be the final word. The Justice Department is likely to appeal the decision, and administration officials could also seek to open a new immigration proceeding against him. Moreover, Mr. Abrego Garcia is still facing separate criminal charges of smuggling undocumented immigrants in a different court altogether in Nashville. Still, Andrew Rossman, one of his lawyers, hailed Judge Zinnes' ruling. Today's decision granting Mr. Abrego Garcia's release is a victory, not just for one Maryland man, but for everyone, Mr. Rossman said. We're gratified by the court's ruling upholding due process and the rule of law. Mr. Abrego Garcia was formally released by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Thursday afternoon and was on his way back to his family in Maryland in the evening, his lawyers said. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, pushed back against the judge's ruling during a news conference. The White House, the administration, opposed this activism from a judge who is really acting as a judicial activist, which unfortunately we have seen in many cases across the country, she said. Abrego Garcia is present in our country illegally. In her 31-page decision, Judge Zinnes said she had little choice but to release Mr. Abrego Garcia, pointing to a remarkable but often overlooked fact about the case. The Trump administration had never obtained a valid final order for his removal from the United States. The lack of a removal order, Judge Zinnes said, meant that the government had been holding Mr. Abrego Garcia without legal authority. It was all the more extraordinary given how his ordeal had started in the first place. In March, immigration officials grabbed Mr. Abrego Garcia off the streets of suburban Maryland and put him on a plane with scores of other immigrants to El Salvador, even though the only judicial order in his name was one that expressly forbade him from being sent there in the first place. Judge Zinnes spent much of her ruling running through what she described as the case's tortured history. That included a nearly 4-month period in which the Trump administration flouted 3 court orders, including one from the Supreme Court, to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release from El Salvador, where he claims to have been tortured while locked up in a notorious prison built for terrorists. During this time, Mr. Trump personally accused Mr. Abrego Garcia of being a member of the violent street gang MS-13, using as evidence a photoshopped image of tattoos on his knuckles. Senior members of his administration joined in the attacks, repeatedly hurling insults at Mr. Abrego Garcia that included gangbanger, monster, illegal predator, and illegal alien terrorist. Then in June, just as Judge Zinnes was losing patience with the White House and threatened to hold officials in contempt, Attorney General Pam Bondi suddenly announced that she was doing what her subordinates had already said was impossible, bringing Mr. Abrego Garcia back from El Salvador. He was returned, however, not merely to comply with Judge Zinnes' instructions, but, as Ms. Bondi said, so that federal prosecutors in Nashville could charge him with having allegedly taken part in a years-long conspiracy to smuggle undocumented immigrants across American state lines. For the better part of the next 3 months, the administration toggled, somewhat confusingly, between promising to prosecute Mr. Abrego Garcia to the full extent of the law and vowing to redeport him to a country other than El Salvador. As officials tacked back and forth, the federal judge overseeing Mr. Abrego Garcia's criminal case released him from custody on the smuggling charges, casting serious doubt on what he referred to as the government's poor attempts to tie Abrego to MS-13. 3 days after he was freed, Mr. Abrego Garcia was detained again, this time by immigration officials who abruptly asserted they would seek to deport him to Uganda, a country to which he has no ties. It was then that his lawyers filed a new court action in front of Judge Zinis, seeking to block his removal to a country not his own. That filing set off a multi-week scramble as officials floated plans to expel Mr. Abrego Garcia to other African countries, including Eswatini and Ghana. But each of the proposals failed because the officials were unable to secure agreements from their counterparts overseas. In late October, as Judge Zinis' patience was wearing thin again, the administration made yet another proposal. It would send Mr. Abrego Garcia to Liberia, which had in fact agreed to take him and was, as government lawyers pointed out in court papers, a thriving democracy and one of the United States' closest partners on the African continent. Mr. Abrego Garcia's lawyers rejected that idea as well and said they were baffled why the White House stubbornly refused to send their client to Costa Rica, the one place to which he had agreed to go and which had also agreed to accept him. Much of the administration's back and forth came into focus only because Judge Zinis repeatedly hauled Justice Department lawyers and immigration officials into her courtroom in Maryland for hearings to determine what they planned to do with Mr. Abrego Garcia. In her ruling, she chided the administration for its conduct during those hearings, saying that government lawyers had at various times stonewalled her, disobeyed her direct instructions, and even affirmatively misled her. That occurred, she pointed out, when the lawyers told her that the option of sending Mr. Abrego Garcia to Costa Rica was no longer viable, leaving Liberia as the only remaining choice. But that, the judge insisted, turned out not to be true. Within 24 hours of the lawyers taking Costa Rica off the table, one of the country's top officials told multiple news sources, Judge Zinis wrote, that its offer to grant Abrego Garcia residence and refugee status is, and always has been, firm, unwavering, and unconditional. All of this suggested to the judge that the administration was not, and perhaps had never been, serious about redeporting Mr. Abrego Garcia, and that, she said, was partly why she had released him. Respondents' persistent refusal to acknowledge Costa Rica as a viable removal option, their threats to send Abrego Garcia to African countries that never agreed to take him, and their misrepresentation to the court that Liberia is now the only country available to Abrego Garcia, all reflect that whatever purpose was behind his detention, she wrote, it was not for the basic purpose of timely third country removal. A grand jury again declines to re-indict Letitia James. It was a striking rejection of the administration's retribution campaign. By Jonah E. Bromwich, Devlin Barrett, and Glenn Thrush. A federal grand jury in Alexandria, Virginia, declined on Thursday to indict Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, the second time in a week that jurors had rejected the effort, a rebuke of President Trump's bid to order up prosecutions against his political enemies. The jury refused to charge Ms. James, who had brought a civil case against Mr. Trump in connection with making false claims on a mortgage application, according to people familiar with the matter, exactly 1 week after another set of jurors did the same. The back-to-back failures by prosecutors to secure an indictment amounted to a striking rejection of the administration's retribution campaign. It highlighted the Justice Department's unusual strategy of pursuing second indictments despite earlier failures in court, and suggested the department would face major hurdles in bringing charges against President Trump's foes. Nothing bars the U.S. Attorney's Office in Eastern Virginia from trying again to indict Ms. James, though a judge might look askance at multiple juries having rejected the charges. A former White House aide whom Mr. Trump had named U.S. Attorney in Eastern Virginia, Lindsay Halligan, succeeded in securing charges against Ms. James in October, but late last month a judge ruled that Ms. Halligan's appointment had violated a federal law that dictates the procedure for filling high-level federal vacancies. That ruling led to the dismissal of the case against Ms. James, as well as another against the former FBI Director James B. Comey. Bruce Green, who teaches legal ethics at Fordham Law School in New York, said there was no constitutional provision forbidding the repeated presentation of the same case to different grand juries, though he added that most prosecutors would take a hint after being rejected once or twice. If a grand jury isn't indicting and you don't even have a lawyer on the other side presenting a defense, that's a pretty strong sign that you don't have a triable case, he said. A lawyer for Ms. James, Abby D. Lowell, said in a statement that the second rejection makes even clearer that this case should never have seen the light of day. A spokesman for the Eastern District of Virginia did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The rejection on Thursday was particularly remarkable, given that it was the third time in just over 2 months that prosecutors had sought to lodge charges against Ms. James. It is vanishingly rare for grand juries to decline to indict a case, but in cases of people arrested after Mr. Trump's deployment of federal agents to patrol city streets, grand jurors have repeatedly refused to do so. Grand jury proceedings are conducted in private, meaning it is unclear what exact charges prosecutors sought to bring on Thursday or a week earlier in Norfolk, Virginia. But a person familiar with the matter said that Roger Keller, a federal prosecutor brought in from Missouri after career lawyers determined the evidence was too weak to support charges, presented the case before grand jurors on Thursday. Mr. Keller also presented the case in Norfolk. The original indictment against Ms. James accused her of having intentionally misled financial institutions about her intent for a home she bought in Norfolk in 2020. Though she indicated that she would use it as a secondary residence, prosecutors said that she always knew that she would use it as a rental investment property. They have said she stood to gain $18,933 in favorable rates from the false claim. Ms. James pleaded not guilty to the charges and repeatedly called them baseless. The property has been occupied for years by Ms. James' great-niece, who told a Norfolk grand jury over the summer that she did not pay rent. Ms. James herself has only reported receiving $1,350 in rent, though she listed the home as an investment property on official disclosures with New York State. No judge has reviewed the substance of the case. Career prosecutors in Ms. Halligan's office had cast doubt on the case, and the burden of proof, if charges were to be secured again, would be high. But the burden for an indictment is far lower. Jurors need only find that there is probable cause to believe a crime may have been committed. Mr. Trump and Ms. James have clashed for years, in part because of the civil suit she brought against him, his company, and his family members. The suit led to a trial at which a judge found Mr. Trump had conspired to exaggerate his net worth to garner favorable treatment from lenders. The case is being considered by New York's highest court. Mr. Trump has vowed revenge. In September, he pushed out his U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric S. Siebert, after Mr. Siebert told Justice Department officials he believed that the evidence did not support criminal charges against Ms. James or Mr. Comey. In Mr. Siebert's place, the president installed Ms. Halligan, who had no prosecutorial experience. The following month, Ms. James was indicted on charges of bank fraud and lying to financial institutions to secure better terms for a mortgage on a home in Virginia. The Justice Department's efforts to seek a new indictment against Mr. Comey have also stalled. Over the weekend, a federal judge in Washington barred prosecutors in the case from gaining access to evidence they had used to obtain the first indictment against Mr. Comey. That evidence largely consisted of communications between Mr. Comey and one of his confidants, Daniel C. Richman, a former federal prosecutor who teaches at Columbia University. Mr. Richman, in an emergency request to Judge Colleen Collar-Catelli, claimed that prosecutors had violated his constitutional rights by failing to get a search warrant for the materials before they used them to seek charges against Comey. The judge's order barring prosecutors from using Mr. Richmond's files is set to expire at midnight on Friday. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. New York was a leader on climate issues. Under Hochul, things changed. Faced with an affordability crisis and rising energy demands, Governor Kathy Hochul has slowed progress on New York's efforts to fight climate change. By Hillary Howard. As recently as last year, New York was considered a trailblazer in tackling climate change. With aggressive laws on the books, the state had planned to nearly eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But New York's environmental agenda, as embodied in its landmark 2019 climate law, has stalled under the watch of Governor Kathy Hochul, who has said that political and economic conditions have shifted and the state has to adapt. The governor, a Democrat, is now dealing with a president who is hostile to renewable energy and has called climate change a con job. She is among the many governors around the country grappling with an affordability crisis, with fast-rising utility bills a main complaint. And she faces soaring energy demands, with electricity experts warning of a possible shortfall in New York City as soon as next summer. The governor has said that we need to govern in reality. Her priority now is to keep the lights and heat on and rates down for New Yorkers, said Ken Lovett, Ms. Hochul's senior communications advisor on energy and environment. Some critics of the governor, however, say that such reasoning is short-sighted in the face of the existential threat of climate change. Environmental activists and some officials in her own party have accused Ms. Hochul of abandoning the state's climate law for politically expedient reasons. The governor faces a re-election bid next year. We're in a moment where it's incredibly important for New York State to lead on energy affordability and climate, said Ms. Moran, a New York policy advocate for Earth Justice, an environmental nonprofit. Unfortunately, over the past year, we've seen the governor run toward the opposite direction. While some business leaders, labor unions, and community groups support the governor's push to use more natural gas and nuclear energy to supply the state's grid, critics say that her focus on affordability has shaped several policy decisions that have undermined the state's climate goals. Some of Ms. Hochul's moves in the past year have alarmed climate activists and like-minded Democratic leaders. She has embraced energy-hungry tech ventures, including a Bitcoin mining operation in the Finger Lakes region. State officials recently agreed to a settlement after years of litigation to extend the life of the gas plant that powers the facility. She also backed a plan for an offshore natural gas pipeline near New York City that had previously been rejected 3 times because of environmental concerns. Ms. Hochul's administration delayed the implementation of an all-electric buildings law passed in 2023 that would have banned gas power in a wide swath of new construction. And the governor has not taken full advantage of a 2023 law that enables the state to develop publicly owned renewable energy projects, though Ms. Hochul was among those who cheered a judge's decision this week to strike down President Trump's halt on wind projects on federal property. Perhaps the loudest complaints, however, are tied to the 2019 climate law. To reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the ambitious legislation calls for New York to get 70% of its electricity from renewable resources, like wind, solar, and hydropower by 2030, and to shift entirely to carbon-free power a decade later. But the state is at least 6 years late in meeting its first target of a 40% decrease in planet-warming pollution by 2030. And full implementation of the law is not possible without its accompanying regulations, which the state is 2 years late in putting into effect. The sticking point is the centerpiece of the law, called Cap and Invest, which would charge polluters for exceeding emissions limits and use those proceeds to invest in renewable projects and energy-efficient initiatives. In the spring, several environmental groups, including Earth Justice, sued the state, arguing that it was in violation of the climate law. By October, a judge agreed, ordering officials to publish the missing regulations by early February. The governor has appealed, saying she needs more time to review and possibly amend the rules. Ms. Hochul's delay is similar to her approach to the rollout of congestion pricing in 2024, when she temporarily paused the tolling program to consider the financial burden on New Yorkers, said Michael B. Girard, an environmental law professor at Columbia. Requiring fossil fuel companies to pay fees through a cap and invest program, Mr. Girard said, could lead to an increase in some consumer prices, like the cost of electricity. In New York, where power rates are already 50% higher than the national average, natural gas remains the largest source of fuel for electricity. In a poll this year, most New Yorkers surveyed said they believed that keeping energy costs low was more important than decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. State Senator Liz Krueger said that the Cap and Invest program would help accomplish both those aims. Her office cited one report that said households making under $200,000 a year would benefit from the policies subsidized by the program. New York is still a leader on clean energy, Mr. Lovett of the governor's office said. The state has exceeded its goals for the generation of solar energy and supported key private projects that include a major offshore wind farm near Long Island and a transmission line that will deliver hydropower from Canada to New York City next year, he said. Ms. Hochul also announced a $1 billion investment fund earmarked for various renewable projects, including emissions reduction over the next 5 years. Critics of Ms. Hochul's climate agenda have said they would also like to see the climate law back on track. The law's Cap and Invest program has the potential to raise $5 billion a year or more, said Justin Flagg, the Director of Communications and Environmental Policy for Ms. Krueger. And some of the business ventures backed by the governor are the same ones stoking the growing demand for energy. Ms. Hochul wants to make the state a hub for tech companies, which can be energy intensive. Currently in development is a $100 billion memory chip facility in central New York that is projected to gobble up enough electricity to power nearly 1.5 million homes. Supporters of the project point out that as many as 50,000 jobs could be created. New York's business ambitions and emissions reduction goals are working at cross purposes, said Sylvanus Salinas, president of the Empire Center for Public Policy, an Albany think tank. They are a train wreck in slow motion. The state faces an increase of up to 24% in annual electricity demand by 2040, according to the most recent draft of its energy plan. Aware of the mounting needs, Ms. Hochul has endorsed an all-of-the-above approach to energy instead of a singular focus on renewables. This, she has said, should help keep utility bills low. Some experts say that these solutions, however, are time-consuming to build and expensive. Nuclear plants take years to construct and cost billions of dollars, and utility customers often end up footing the bill for gas infrastructure. This month, Ms. Hochul has an opportunity to curb gas costs by amending a law that requires utilities to provide automatic gas hookups to new customers. Getting rid of the rule could result in about $581 million of savings on bills every year, according to a new analysis. The governor is reviewing the legislation, Mr. Lovett said. Ms. Krueger called the repeal of the rule, as well as programs like Cap and Invest, critical affordability measures that we can't afford to delay. U.S. helped to weaken report at UN environment talks, participants say. American officials joined Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran in objecting to language on fossil fuels, biodiversity, and plastics in a report that was 3 years in the making. By Eric Neeler. The Trump administration sided with officials from Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iran in a successful effort to block part of a United Nations report about the dire state of the planet because it called for phasing out fossil fuels, switching to clean energy, and reducing plastics, according to 2 participants. The section targeted was a summary of the Global Environment Outlook 7, a 1,210-page report that translates scientific evidence collected and reviewed by 300 experts into plain language that can be used by governments around the world. It was issued on Monday at the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi. It was the first time that countries failed to issue a summary for policymakers since the United Nations Environment Program began publishing Outlook reports in 1997. During negotiations over the document in October, the U.S. sided with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran to block the summary from being included, according to David Broadstock, a partner in the Lantau Group, an energy and environmental consulting firm with offices around the Asia-Pacific region, and Patrick Schroeder, a senior research fellow at Chatham House, a research organization based in London. The move was another indication of how sharply the Trump administration has reversed course on the environment. Under the Biden administration, the United States had made tackling climate change a top priority and frequently clashed with oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia over their approaches to global warming. Some authors of the study blame U.S. officials for undermining the process by coming in at the last minute to voice opposition. The Trump administration did not send a delegation to the October meeting in Nairobi, where the report was assembled, but it did shape the final outcome, according to Dr. Broadstock, who was a coordinating author for 2 of the report's 21 chapters and a negotiator in discussions of the summary for policymakers. Non-attendance does not mean a lack of influence, he said. It means exertion of influence in a certain manner. The U.S. Department of State did not respond to a request for comment. It's the latest step by the Trump administration to undermine global climate policy. Shortly after re-entering office, President Trump signed an executive order to pull the United States out of the 2015 Paris Agreement, the 2015 pact in which nearly all countries agreed to cut greenhouse gas emissions to limit global warming. The administration was accused of using bullying tactics to block adoption of a landmark global measure in October that would have imposed a global pollution tax on the shipping industry, and the United States did not send a delegation to the COP30 climate summit in Brazil in November. Governments use the summary for policymakers to help guide energy and environmental policies, Dr. Broadstock said. The UN report compiled existing science on the harmful effects of climate change, air and water pollution, land degradation, biodiversity, and the growing threat from plastic waste. In October, during final negotiations on the report, a U.S. State Department official called into a video conference with a room full of negotiators in Nairobi, according to accounts from 2 participants. The officer said that the U.S. opposed the final language on climate change, on the need to switch to clean energy, on biodiversity and the use of plastics, according to Dr. Schroeder, who helped negotiate the report language and was present when the U.S. officer called. It felt a bit like a slap in the face because the person who joined did not even turn on their camera, Dr. Schroeder said. The UN report took 3 years of work and found that transitioning to clean energy and a cleaner environment would deliver global economic benefits that could reach $20 trillion per year by 2070. Fossil fuels must be out, Edgar E. Gutierrez Espeleta, a co-chairman of the Outlook report and former environment minister of Costa Rica, said in a call with reporters before the report was made public. We have to explore more renewable sources, and we need the scientific community to explore more in new materials that would help us replace those that we are using at this moment, he said. After the objections of the U.S. official, as well as some from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and other oil and gas-producing nations, the summary for policymakers' language was dropped entirely, rather than renegotiated. Over the past 2 decades, the United States has acted as a referee of sorts on numerous global agreements. By refusing to participate in the negotiations and then objecting to the final language, the Trump administration is undermining the entire process, which bodes poorly for future international environmental agreements, according to Dr. Schroeder. The United States and other oil-producing countries took their political red lines and then marked text that they didn't like, he said. Although it was scientifically correct, They just wanted to have it removed. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Zelensky says revised U.S. plan still calls for Ukraine to leave Donbass. The Ukrainian leader rejected the demand, making clear that territorial issues remain unresolved as Ukraine and Europe sent a counterproposal to the United States. By Maria Verenikova. President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Thursday that a compromise peace plan backed by the United States still called for Ukraine to withdraw from the eastern Donbass region, a concession that Mr. Zelensky said his country would not make. Speaking to reporters in Kyiv, Mr. Zelensky made clear that territorial questions remained a major unresolved issue, a day after Ukrainian and European leaders sent to the United States a counterproposal to end the war. Security guarantees to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine again after any halt in the fighting are another primary issue still under negotiation. Mr. Zelensky said that under the American vision, the territory in the Donbass that Ukraine still holds would become what the Trump administration calls a free economic zone, where no Ukrainian or Russian troops would be present. At the same time, Russia would be free to keep troops in the part of the Donbass it has seized from Ukraine. The Ukrainian leader said the Americans had left uncertain who would govern the free economic zone after a Ukrainian withdrawal. He added that it would be unfair for Ukraine to be forced to leave the Donbass while Russia, which invaded in 2022, could stay. When you talk to us about a compromise, Mr. Zelensky said about the American peace plan, you must offer a fair compromise. Mr. Zelensky said that Russia had agreed to give up small amounts of territory it holds in the Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Sumy regions of Ukraine. Russia would freeze the lines in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, where it has also seized territory, he said. Ukraine has called for freezing the entirety of the front line, including in the Donbass, in the event of a ceasefire. Mr. Zelensky said on Thursday that any eventual decision to cede territory would have to be presented to voters in the form of elections or a referendum. Such a vote could be held only if the fighting stopped and security could be guaranteed, Ukraine has said. The Ukrainian leader said on social media that Ukrainian and American officials had held an in-depth conversation on Thursday about security guarantees. Earlier this week, Mr. Zelensky said that the United States had discussed the potential for legally binding guarantees that would be approved by Congress. Ukraine has been pressing hard for concrete security guarantees from the United States and Europe, saying that without those, it cannot agree to a deal to end the war. The Kremlin has demanded that Ukraine cede vast territory, shrink its military, and stay out of the NATO alliance, all of which Kyiv sees as leaving it vulnerable to renewed aggression. Earlier on Thursday, Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany said that Ukrainian and European leaders had sent the United States their own revised proposal to end the war. Kyiv and its allies are working to steer President Trump away from his insistence on a peace resolution that would favor Russia. Mr. Merz, speaking in Berlin, said that the proposal was sent on Wednesday after a phone call between Mr. Trump and European leaders. That call included pretty strong words, according to Mr. Trump, who has shown frustration with the sluggish pace of peace negotiations. Mr. Merz did not detail the contents of the revised proposal, but said the main issue here is what territorial concessions Ukraine is prepared to make. However, that is a question that must be answered primarily by the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian people, Mr. Merz told reporters after a meeting with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO. We have also made that clear to President Trump. Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain convened a video meeting on Thursday with Mr. Zelensky and officials from more than 25 nations that have pledged to support Ukraine after a peace deal is reached. In a statement, the British government said that Mr. Zelensky updated the governments on continued Russian attacks, and the group discussed what they called progress toward using frozen Russian assets to help finance Ukraine's war effort. They all agreed this is a pivotal moment for Ukraine, its people, and for the security we all share across the Euro-Atlantic region, the British statement said. But a flurry of recent diplomatic negotiations have failed to produce any breakthroughs to end the war, and Mr. Trump has expressed growing impatience. We discussed Ukraine in pretty strong words, Mr. Trump said on Wednesday after his call with the European leaders, including Mr. Merz, President Emmanuel Macron of France, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain. Mr. Trump did not provide details about what those words were. I think we had some little disputes about people and we're going to see how it turns out, he told reporters at the White House. Mr. Trump and Mr. Merz said that European leaders wanted to meet this weekend with Mr. Zelensky and American officials, but that the prospects of that meeting depended on the U.S. response to the revised peace proposal. We don't want to be wasting time, Mr. Trump said. Sometimes you have to let people fight it out. As it tried to negotiate peace on more favorable terms, Ukraine was also trying to secure long-term guarantees to deter future Russian aggression and a framework for economic cooperation to rebuild the country after the war, which started nearly 4 years ago when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky held talks with American officials and business leaders on Wednesday to discuss those rebuilding efforts. Attendees included the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, who has been involved in negotiations to end the war, and Larry Fink, chief executive of the BlackRock investment firm, who has previously been tapped to help coordinate investment to rebuild Ukraine after the war. In a video address after his talks with the American officials and Mr. Fink, Mr. Zelensky cautioned that reconstruction would become possible only once the country was secure. When there is security, he said, everything else follows. Ukraine faces an increasingly tough battlefield as Russia tries to strengthen its position in negotiations by mounting offensives along the entire front line. Sergei V. Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, said on Thursday that Russia had no timeline for ending the war. Some say it would end by spring. Some say during 2026. We are not expending effort on this, Mr. Lavrov said at a roundtable discussion with ambassadors in Moscow. Russia insists that all its demands be fulfilled before a ceasefire, including ones Ukraine deems unacceptable. The biggest sticking point is the Kremlin's insistence that Ukraine cede all of the eastern region of the country, known as the Donbass. Russian forces are close to capturing Pokrovsk, a strategically important city in eastern Ukraine where the two sides have been fighting since July 2024. The city is largely under Russian control, though Ukrainian forces still hold parts of it. Overnight on Wednesday, Russia bombarded Ukraine's infrastructure, according to the Ukrainian authorities, the latest in a series of attacks on the country's energy grid, while Ukrainian forces carried out their own drone strikes. The Russian defense minister said on Thursday that its forces had destroyed more than 280 Ukrainian drones, including 32 that were flying toward Moscow. All 4 airports serving the Russian capital had to halt flights for hours, causing major delays, Russian authorities said. Charity Raffle offers a chance at a Picasso for a $120 ticket. A French charity is raffling Picasso's 1941 portrait, Tête de Femme, valued at more than €1 million for €100 a ticket to raise funds for Alzheimer's research. By Jenny Gross. A French charity is testing an unusual fundraising approach in the fine art world, raffling off a Picasso painting worth more than €1 million, $1.2 million, to one winner. The raffle tickets are on sale for €100 each, and proceeds will go toward research into Alzheimer's disease. The artwork to be won is Picasso's 1941 portrait, Tête de Femme. Alzheimer's Research Foundation, the charity hosting the raffle, was founded in 2004 and is France's leading funder of Alzheimer's research. The charity raises money for clinical research programs, funds doctoral and postdoctoral fellowships, and promotes the sharing of research. Perry Cuchin, a French television producer, said in an interview on Wednesday that she came up with the idea for a raffle after having seen her mother use them at fundraising events she hosted. Ms. Cochin, who owns the business Wa La Table, a tableware company, said that instead of offering raffle tickets to a few hundred people, as is typical, she wanted to organize a raffle that was open to anyone in the world. She tried to imagine what object or item would appeal to most people, and artwork by Picasso came to mind. Olivier Picasso, Pablo Picasso's grandson and a childhood friend of hers, was on the board, she said, and she reserved the 1941 painting from the Opera Gallery, which will be paid slightly under 1 million euros after the draw. The goal, she said, is to sell 120,000 tickets, enough to cover the cost of the painting and raise some 11 million euros for Alzheimer's research. If not enough tickets are sold to cover the cost of the painting, all participants will be reimbursed, she said. Raffle tickets are being sold online. The draw will take place at Christie's in Paris on April 14th at 6 p.m. local time. Olivier Picasso said in an interview that the piece being raffled off, Tête de Femme, was most likely painted in the same Paris studio where his grandfather painted his 1937 masterpiece, Guernica. Pablo Picasso painted Tête de Femme in 1941 during the breakdown of his marriage to Olga Khokhlova, his first wife, a period that was extremely complicated for my grandfather, Olivier Picasso said. He added that the black, gray, and brown colors in the piece reflected the unhappiness that his grandfather was experiencing at the time. Associating the name of Pablo Picasso to charity, a charitable purpose, is very important because my grandfather was very generous with the people around him, he said. Despite decades of research, there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease, the most commonly diagnosed form of dementia, and no treatment that can stop or reverse its progression. Ms. Cochin has organized 2 other raffles for Picasso paintings, with the first such raffle taking place in 2013 and the second in 2020, raising a total of more than 10 million euros. The 2013 winner was Jeffrey Ganano, who at the age of 25 became the owner of a Picasso drawing valued at 860,000 euros. The 2020 winner was Claudia Borgogno, an accountant from Italy whose son had given her a raffle ticket for Christmas. She won a 1921 Picasso valued at $1 million. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, December 12th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.